It's a delightful day. It's cold, it's crisp, it's November, and Laura Dodsworth is here. Very good morning to you.
Good morning. Do you know, I didn't even notice the weather on the way today.
Did you not?
No.
It's chilly, though.
I was just thinking about the dystopia that's creeping up on us day
Right.
by day. I didn't even really notice what was going on the way in because the news has been quite consuming recently, hasn't it?
It really has. I mean, when you see all of the rioting and all of the sort of the tear gas and all of the water cannon being fired at people, and you think, why is this happening? And you wonder what it is that's making the government issue these kinds of instructions to their more or less paramilitary police forces to start attacking their own people.
Why is it happening? Well, the Austrian Interior Minister has called out the increasing radicalisation of people who don't want to be vaccinated, anti-vaxxers. And I thought, hang on a minute. First of all, recently you locked down the unvaccinated.
Yeah.
Now you're going to lock down everyone because just locking down the unvaccinated wasn't going to work.
Apparently it didn't work. Imagine that.
And now you're going to force everybody in the country to be vaccinated. I wonder why. I wonder why there's some radicalisation among the population. What a weird way to twist it round. So I wanted to talk about this today because I've been thinking about this for a while. I've been wondering about writing about it. But the thing is, if you draw comparisons to totalitarianism, you get accused of being too extreme. And, don't mention the Nazis.
Yeah.
I feel like an episode of Fawlty Towers here.
Right.
Don't mention the Nazis.
Well, I mentioned it once,
Don't
but I
mention
think
the
I got
Nazis.
away with it.
But the thing is, totalitarianism doesn't arrive overnight.
No.
It creeps up on you. And then Lord Sumption brought out a great article in the Telegraph yesterday, and I thought, right, if it's good enough for Jonathan Sumption, it's good enough for me. I'm going to stand shoulder to shoulder with him.
Yeah.
I think we do have a problem. Look, we don't live in a totalitarian country. This is still a democracy.
Yeah.
But there are signs of authoritarianism and totalitarianism which are creeping up around Europe, which are very troubling early warning signs I think we need to pay attention to.
I think we absolutely do. Do you know what I think about this government is that this government is less totalitarian since Matt Hancock left it. I think he was quite keen on that sort of stuff. And I think for all the criticism I've made of Sajid Javid in the past, he does at least seem to have a sort of a sentiment of democracy about him. And when he said at the weekend, and I know that we can't always believe everything they say, but when he said, look, we're not going to in any way mandate vaccination. I mean, again, if I'd been Andrew Marr, who I'm not, I would have said, well, hang on a minute. You've already mandated it for people who are in care homes and you've already mandated it for people in the NHS. And then he kind of addressed that and said, well, that's different. But is it?
No, it's not different. And actually, I'd love to have a big, broad, sweeping conversation about totalitarianism with you, but it's about the individual. It's about the person at the other end. The person at the other end of that metaphorical jackboot. I just published a story in my Substack about a care home worker who's going through the disciplinary process and is about to lose their job. Now, in her case, she's had COVID, okay? And she's got antibodies.
Right.
Okay, so if this was really about medicine, public health, if it was about science, you could at least let them all have antibody tests,
Yes.
okay? And anybody who's got antibodies doesn't have to be vaccinated, right? And there should also be religious exemptions.
And do antibodies last? I mean, I know this is not a medical, well, it is a medical question and you're not a medical person, but I don't know the answer to it. Maybe you do. If you have antibodies because you've had COVID, do they stay with you for a long time or a short time or what?
Okay, well, somebody was just saying recently, somebody from the NHS, I feel useless now because I didn't catch a note of the name, sorry, but on the
That's
BBC saying that the reason that we're not going to have such a big wave this winter is because we have so much natural immunity, because we have more infections in the summer.
And we're supposedly ahead of the curve than Europe, right?
So you can't have it both ways.
Right.
You can't say natural immunity doesn't count in care workers, but we're going to do better this winter because we've got natural immunity. Of course it's got to count for something.
Yeah.
So anyway, this poor person who has sent me their story and I've published it, they had a breakdown last summer because of the stress of lockdowns, which they described as psychological torture, but they love their job. They genuinely, clearly love their job, looking after adults with learning disabilities, has had COVID, has antibodies, doesn't want to be vaccinated, will have to leave their job.
Yeah.
And said to me, that's 10% of the Care Quality Commission registered workers who are going to be leaving their jobs. This is decimating an industry.
Yeah.
And if you look at the overall,
as many as I think 60,000 people. That was the figure I heard.
And what does that do to the overall net benefit of public health? Those adults with learning disabilities in this home, they're not going to have a better quality of care because they're now short-staffed. It won't help them live full and meaningful lives, and they won't be safer.
No. So therefore, you have to ask why again, don't you? Because if they're not going to be safer, why is everybody so convinced that is somehow the answer? Because It's one thing for them in this country to nudge us, and you've talked about the nudge unit many times about, if you haven't been vaccinated, please go and get your vaccine, please go and get your booster, it's the best thing you can do, la-di-la. That has turned from a recommendation to a suggestion to an order in Austria.
Absolutely, and not just Austria, also Germany has said that they'll mandate vaccinations for everybody. Now let's think about what that would look like. Does that look like people being strapped onto gurneys and forcibly vaccinated? That's all very one flew over the cuckoo nest.
Isn't it just?
Right? Or is it that people won't be allowed to leave their homes, or they will be fined and then imprisoned? My opinion is, if you have lost bodily sovereignty, you've lost everything.
Yeah.
If you don't have freedom over your body, you don't have freedom.
Right.
And so this is a totalitarian concept, that the state can exert absolute control over you.
It is. It's like you turning up, as you say, in one flew over the cuckoo's nest and being handed your medication and your little cup, and you take the pill and you swallow the water.
Yeah, and you have to, otherwise you get the electric shock therapy.
Yeah.
So the World Health Organization have said this as well, that
and now they've joined in, haven't they?
Yeah, that vaccine mandates should be a last resort when persuasion hasn't worked. But this is missing the point again. If you try to persuade somebody and then they say no, I believe that's where it should be left. No means no.
Well, do you know,
my
isn't it
body,
funny?
my choice.
Isn't it funny, because that applies in every other case, including in sexual matters. If you say no, that means no. It doesn't mean yes, maybe. Means no. And the same people who would say to you, you must have a vaccination, would defend that as a principle, wouldn't they?
Yes, but no doesn't mean no in totalitarian states.
No.
That's the thing. Let's look at China, where they've had basically compulsory contraception and sterilisation when they had the one-child policy.
Yeah.
And there were also anecdotal reports of forced abortions, even at late stage.
Right.
Okay, so the state had absolute control over people's bodies.
Right.
Now, we're not China. We're a democracy. But what we're seeing is a tipping point in Western liberal democratic countries where the state is saying, actually, no, we do want to have control over this one aspect. But you have to have a line. You have to hold a line. We're in danger of crossing a Rubicon here.
Yeah.
And the most important thing is to protect the freedoms that make being a human worthwhile, that make life worthwhile.
Well, you remember Neil Ferguson saying once in one of his many interviews that at the beginning they looked at what China was doing to control the spread of the virus and thought, we'd never get away with that here. I think those were his words.
Yeah.
But then later said, do you know, actually we probably could have done. You know, where people that I know who know people in China were telling me that you would come home from, say, a visit abroad, and you would be told to quarantine in your home, and they would literally come and sort of seal up the door, and they'd put a camera on the front, and if you went out, you'd get arrested and put in jail.
Yeah, it's a form of medical imperialism, and it's why virologists and medical people shouldn't be in charge.
Well, this is it, and this is a really important point, I think, because we have fallen, or some parts of our society have fallen for this kind of ludicrous notion that because you've got a degree in something, or because you're an expert in something, that somehow you can then therefore dictate to us how we should be living. I'm not having that.
No, and I think that the idea that a mandatory QR code enables your participation in life is something that people should be worried about. Don't forget that when the UK vaccine passport was first revealed, the curtains slipped a little.
Yeah.
And do you remember we saw functionality on there that was nothing to do with vaccination status? There were things like ethnicity, criminal convictions, alleged criminal behaviour. What has that got to do with being potentially infectious and going into a nightclub? Nothing.
Right.
So the app was built with all of this functionality, and that's been the same when we've seen the curtain slip on other passports around the world, and it looks quite similar to the social credit system in China. So like I keep saying, we're not China, we are a democracy, but there are these signs coming in that the state wants to exert complete control over your bodily autonomy. I mean, the other things that are indicative of authoritarianism and totalitarianism are emergency powers.
Yeah.
We still have emergency powers, and they contained extreme powers. Also, the legitimacy of those powers are constantly justified by the use of fear. So the crisis maintains the imposition of these increasing and continuing interruptions to our freedom, and there's been very minimal political opposition. So we're not living under one-party rule, but the opposition has been spineless. Should we call it spineless?
Well, not only that, but quite encouraging of it in the sense that either they wanted it done earlier or harder or longer.
Yeah.
Right.
And there's a suppression of opposition from other quarters as well. You know, scientists, journalists and politicians have been censored, videos have been removed from YouTube. There were Ofcom rules which inhibited the discussion about the public health policy. So when you have that suppression of discussion only in one direction, that's not healthy for democracy either. And then, you know, finally, there's state control over the individual, the state and also the World Health Organization saying, well, we'll persuade you unless you can't be persuaded, and then we'll make you.
Yeah.